Hey guys, what's going on? John here, back again for another Magic the Gathering video. And in today's video, I've got a new deck tech for you from a Strixhaven spoiler. Today's deck tech is built around Osgir the Reconstructor. Now before we get into the video, I've got a couple channel promotions for you. If you enjoy the videos and want to support me, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. It's free, takes almost no time, and is a huge help to me. Also, if you'd like to interact with me, you can join my Discord, and if you're willing to go the extra mile for me, then you can support me over at Patreon. Patrons get special perks, such as special roles in the Discord, a special access to new deck tech videos, and much more that you can see if you go to the link in the description below. Now let's get into the deck tech. First off, we've got the commander, who is Osgir the Reconstructor. He's a 4/4 legendary creature, giant artificer, costs 2, a red and a white. He has vigilance, pay 1, sacrifice an artifact. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Then you can also pay X and tap him, exile an artifact card with mana value X from your graveyard. Create 2 tokens that are copies of the exiled card. Activate only as a sorcery. So this deck is generally going to be built around sacrificing artifacts, getting them back with his second ability, and generally creating a lot of value. Now this deck, although it's in Boros colors, is incredibly powerful. It's one of the most powerful decks I've ever showcased on this channel, so I hope you guys enjoy this deck tech. Our first category is Boros RAMP, which is incredible, but this ramps so much because of the access that we have to artifacts. We can play artifact-based ramp that would normally be inefficient, which is actually extremely efficient in this deck because of the way the commander works. First off, we've got Burnished Heart that can grab us 2 basic lands when it sacrifices itself, Dockside Extortionist, which generates us a ton of treasures and ramps us very quickly, and Solemn Simulacrum, which can get basic lands when it ETBs and draws cards when it dies, and is an artifact which does triple duty in this deck because all 3 of those abilities make it being able to be reused with Osgir and give it a ton of extra value in the deck. Next up, we've got Arcane Signet, Boros Signet, and Talisman of Conviction, all of which are 2 mana rocks that tap for both of our colors and can be reanimated by Osgir. We've also got Mind Stone, Commander Sphere, and Hedron Archive, all of which are mana rocks that tap for mana, and we can also sacrifice them to draw some cards, making them extremely useful since we can sacrifice them and then reanimate them with Osgir. We've also got Mox Tantalite, Lotus Bloom, and Wayfarer's Bauble. The Bauble allows us to sacrifice it to grab basic lands, and since it's an artifact, we can reanimate it with Osgir. Mox Tantalite and Lotus Bloom are not very good cards on their own, but if we get them into our graveyard, we can pay 0, tap, and make 2 copies of them by exiling it from our graveyard, which they don't have to be suspended for, meaning they come out immediately and generate us a ton of mana. These are some of the cards that are normally unplayable, but become great with Osgir. We've also got Gilded Lotus, Soul Ring, and Thran Dynamo, all mana rocks that tap for multiple mana. In Gilded Lotus and Thran Dynamo's case, that's 3, and for Soul Ring, you only have to pay 1 and you get 2 mana. They're also all artifacts that, with Osgir's ability, send us mana positive. Worn Power Stone, Jeska's Will, and Smothering Tithe round out our final ramp pieces. Worn Power Stone is a 3 mana rock that ETB's tapped, but gives us 2 mana, which is still relatively efficient. Sadly, we can't use it immediately when we activate Osgir's ability to make copies of it, so it's a little slower. Jeska's Will is an extremely underrated card, which, if we've got Osgir out, adds us a ton of red mana and gets us some card advantage, which is extremely powerful and usually leads to us being set in a good position to win the game. Finally, Smothering Tithe. You all know it. It's an incredible card that generates us a ton of treasure if not answered immediately. Our second category is Boros Card Draw. Again, another thing that Boros doesn't typically do well, but because of this deck and the way Osgir works, we're able to take advantage of it. Chromatic Sphere and Chromatic Star both do the same thing. Pay 1, you can sacrifice them to add some mana, and draw cards. Really good with Osgir's ability. Coveted Jewel is a 6 mana rock, but when it ETBs you draw 3 cards, you can tap to add 3 mana of any one color, and whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls attack you and are blocked, that player draws 3 and gains control of it. Now that last part is not a downside for us because we have Osgir, so we can just sacrifice our Coveted Jewels, and if we pay 6 into Osgir's ability, we then draw 6 cards, have access to 6 mana, and our opponents don't have access to it because we can just sacrifice them using Osgir, which stops the opponents from drawing any cards and getting any mana. We've also got Mishra's and Urza's Bauble, both 0 mana artifacts that'll draw us a card and tap to have a pretty irrelevant ability. Skullclamp and Quicksmith Genius are both very good card draw outlets. Skullclamp allows us to draw cards when an equipped creature dies, which is really insane, and Quicksmith Genius allows us to rummage whenever an artifact ETB is under our control. Our third category is Wheel and Deal. This is not what it seems. This is our sacrifice outlets for artifacts. Osgir himself is not a very efficient sacrifice outlet. Yes, he doesn't have to tap, but he pays 1 mana and the only effect is giving a creature +2/+0. So we have some more efficient outlets that generate us some better value. Grinding Station allows us to tap, sacrifice an artifact, and mill a player for 3. But when an artifact ETBs, it untaps. So we can reuse this repeatedly even though it's a tap ability, and usually we'll be actually milling ourselves unless we can immediately win the game off of milling. KCI sacrifices artifacts, adds 2 to our mana pool. It's extremely powerful and typically leads to a win if gone unanswered. And finally, Trading Post is an extremely good modal card. The last ability is the most powerful, where you can pay 1, tap it, sacrifice an artifact to draw a card. You can also sacrifice a creature to reanimate an artifact, and you can also make a 0/1 white goat and discard a card to gain 4 life, which is nice if we want to get something like a Lotus Petal or Lotus Bloom and Mox Tantalite into the graveyard. We've only got 3 of those, so we're on to category 4, which is the Reanimation Station. This is getting our artifacts back to our hand or the battlefield. We don't always have to exile them with Osgir. We've got sometimes better things to do and don't want to exile them and just make 2 copies. So Mirror Retriever and Junk Diver are both creatures that when they die, you return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Scrap Trawler says whenever it or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser CMC. So that allows us to sacrifice our artifacts and then get value by reanimating our other artifacts and generating like a chain where you just sacrifice an artifact to something like a Krark Clan Ironworks, get back another artifact, pay the mana from the Krark Clan Ironworks, and just continue to chain that with Scrap Trawler out on the battlefield. We've also got Goblin Engineer, which tutors an artifact into our graveyard, and then we can pay a red, tap it to sacrifice an artifact to reanimate another artifact with CMC 3 or less, which is extremely good. We can tutor out an artifact with CMC 3 or less, and then next turn, do that second ability to get that artifact immediately to the field. Goblin Welder basically makes us sacrifice an artifact and have an artifact in our graveyard, and those artifacts basically swap places. So the artifact that was on the field goes to our graveyard, artifact that was in the graveyard goes to our battlefield. It can also target an opponent, which can be really good if they've got a powerful artifact and something like a mana rock in the graveyard. And finally, we've got Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, which is extremely good, because whenever you cast a historic spell, you return a creature card with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic, so basically if we have Goblin Engineer, Goblin Welder, Mirror Retriever, Junk Diver, anything like that in the graveyard, we can reanimate that whenever we cast an artifact with Teshar. So category 5 for us is our value-based artifacts. These are just artifacts that are extremely good in the deck. They don't really fit any specific theme other than just value, but they're all so good that you have to include them, and seeing as this is just generally an artifact-based deck, it's really good to have them. Commander's Plate gives our commander basically protection from each color that's not in his color identity, so pro green, pro blue, and pro black. Maul of the Skyclaves enters the battlefield and immediately equips, gives the creature +2/+2 flying in first strike, which makes any creature on our field immediately a threat. And then Sunforger, we can unattach it to tutor a red or white instant card with CMC 4 or less, cast that card without paying its mana cost. So it can function as a way to protect our commander remove a threat, anything like that, it's super good. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots both can equip to our creatures, give it a combination of haste and hexproof or haste and shroud. Thousand Year Elixir allows us to activate Osgir the turn he comes down, and we can pay 1 and tap it to untap Osgir, which allows him to be activated a second time. Lithoform Engine allows us to tap it to copy Osgir's activated ability to exile another artifact and make more copies. We can also copy our permanent spells and our instant and sorcery spells with it. Magerite Stone also allows us to untap Osgir, and Mesmeric Orb mills us cards when we untap permanents, putting artifacts in the graveyard to activate Osgir's ability. Finally, we've got Mycosynth Lattice and Sculpting Steel. Sculpting Steel, we pay 3 mana, get another of any of our artifacts on the field. Usually that's going to be another mana rock or a high cost artifact to basically, help us out with any artifact we may need 2 of. And then Mycosynth Lattice makes all permanents artifacts, all cards that aren't on the battlefield, spells, and permanents colorless, and allows us to spend mana as though it were mana of any color. All around a really good card. It also allows us to make copies of anything in our graveyard. Category 6 now is Victory. This is our win conditions. This is how we're going to win the game. This deck seems to struggle to win the game in just a normal build, so I tried to include a fair amount of win conditions. Mirror Battlesphere and Wormcoil Engine basically both just make a ton of tokens, which we can also pump with Osgir's Sacrifice ability, representing big threats, especially if we exile them from the graveyard and make copies of them. Zerta the Dawnwaker allows us to activate Osgir's ability for 2 less, which usually will be backbreaking for our opponents because it'll be so cheap to exile things from our yards that we'll win within a couple turns because of the sheer value that we get from it. It can also make creatures unable to block, which is really good if we've got the Battlesphere or Wormcoil Engine out on the field. Reckless Fireweaver allows us to deal a damage to each opponent whenever an artifact ETB is under our control, which usually will represent a lot of damage and a lethal threat across the game. Aetherflux Reservoir gains us a life for each spell we've cast this turn whenever we cast a spell, and we can pay 50 life, deal 50 damage to a creature or player. If we gain enough life over time by casting enough spells, we can basically just beam our opponents to death with this. We've also got Luminarch Ascension, which, if we get 4 quest counters on it, we can pay 2 as many times as we want to make 4/4 White Angels, which represent huge flying threats that our opponents really have to deal with very quickly or deal damage to us to stop us from getting the quest counters. Category 7 is our removal and Boardwipes. We've moved away from the main synergistic parts of the deck and just into more necessary parts of the deck. Cards that are necessary but not flashy. So Chaos Warp and Generous Gift can remove any permanent. Wear and Tear can destroy an artifact, enchantment, or both. Vandal Blast can destroy an artifact, or we can pay 5 to destroy all of our opponent's artifacts. Path to Exile and Sword Plowshares both are 1 mana exile based removal for creatures. Path to Exile gives them a basic land, and Sword Plowshares gives them some life. And then our Boardwipes, we've got Austere Command, which can be really good because it can be modal, so we can choose what to destroy. Tragic Arrogance, because usually we'll be keeping our best stuff and our opponents will be keeping their worst stuff. And just a good old Wrath of God, because sometimes you just need that 4 mana Boardwipe for the creatures. Category 8, we've got our Tutors and Protection. We need to tutor out some cards, and we also need to protect our commander and our artifacts. So Gamble allows us to tutor, and then we have to discard a card at random. But usually that won't matter because even if we're discarding the artifact we can reanimate it, so there's no issue with that. Enlightened Tutor also can tutor an artifact or enchantment, put it on top, and at instant speed, we'll usually do that on an opponent's instep, so we can just draw it on our turn. Flawless Maneuver, Boros Charm, and that last one is supposed to be Akroma's Will, but I messed up. Basically, Flawless Maneuver gives our creatures indestructible until end of turn. Boros Charm can give our permanents indestructible and give a creature double strike. And then Akroma's Will, which I did not put into this apparently, is a modal spell that basically we can cast it for both modes if we control our commander. and it can give our creatures flying, double strike, lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors. So it functions as both a win condition and a protection spell. Our final category is just our lands. Ancient Den, Darksteel Citadel, and Great Furnace are really good because we can basically turn them into rituals if they go into our graveyard at any point using Osgir's ability. Buried Ruin, Inventor's Fair, and Sequestered Stash all play with artifacts. Buried Ruin and Sequestered Stash both get artifacts back, and Inventor's Fair can tutor out an artifact by sacrificing itself. Battlefield Forge, Clifftop Retreat, and Fury Calm Snarl are lands that typically enter untapped and tap for both of our colors. Rugged Prairie, Sacred Foundry, and Sunbaked Canyon also all enter untapped and tap for our colors. Sunbaked Canyon also can sacrifice itself to draw a card. We've also got Command Tower and Exotic Orchard, which can tap for any color that we need typically. And we've also got Ancient Tomb and Command Beacon. Ancient Tomb taps to add 2 colorless and deals 2 damage to us. Command Beacon can put our commander into our hand from the command zone, which will be helpful if Osgir dies enough times that you're having trouble recasting him. We've also got 7 mountains and 9 plains to round out the basic lands of the deck. That's all for today's deck tech. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to like and subscribe if you did. It takes almost no time and it's super helpful for supporting my channel. Also, the links to the Patreon and the Discord are down below in the description. You can support me for as little as $1 a month on Patreon, and it's super helpful. It goes a long way to continuing my channel. And the Discord is helpful just so you can talk to me, talk to anyone there, get help with building decks. I'm very active on the Discord, as are the people I typically record my gameplay videos with, so you can talk to any of them there too. That'll be all for today's video. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you later.